Welcome back. This is week 3 of Questions Jesus Asked. And before I get into the message, I want to share a little bit of information. This is primarily for the members of Winchester Community United Methodist Church. We just had a kind of a rude surprise. In our latest water bill, it was double what it normally is. In fact, it was $600 for last month. It's normally around $300. For those of you who don't live in California, water out here is very expensive. And we've discovered that someone has been stealing water from the church. And so we're going to install some security cameras just to keep track of things. And as a result, both the water bill and the security cameras, we're going to have some additional expenses that were unexpected. Now, during this COVID time, we've been able to meet all of our basic financial obligations, and that's been wonderful. So thank you to those of you who have been giving very faithfully. And so just want to make you aware of that so you can maybe think through, are there some additional ways that you might help out with those unexpected financial needs. And of course, as always, you can give electronically by going to our website. The web address will be at the end of the message. Or you can drop off a check at the church or mail it to the church or bring it on Sunday and put it in our offering box that we now have. So thank you, though, for those of you who will pray about this need for the church. And we're confident that all of the financial needs will be met. I've shared with some of you an incident that occurred some years ago when my father passed away. I shared that news at church on Sunday morning, the church I was serving at the time, which was in Ohio. And after the service, an older gentleman approached me, put his arm around me, and he said, "My dad died 20 years ago, and there's not a week goes by that I don't wish I could ask him one more question." There was something about that that really helped me. Helped me as I was grieving the loss of my father, because my father was one of those people that I went to with questions. Anytime Pam and I were going to buy a house, I'd always talk it over with my dad because he was in construction his whole career. So he understood some things about buildings and construction and homes. We'd also talk it over with Pam's dad, who was been in real estate, still is in real estate. But it was always great to have him to go to ask questions. And of course, my whole extended family did that with him constantly. My brother, my sister, nieces and nephews. Dad was always the person to go to with questions. And so his loss, that was just one of the ways that his loss was noticeable, that we could no longer go to him and ask questions. It's always good to have someone that you can go to ask questions, someone in whom you feel confident. And of course, as I've said in this series, people ask Jesus a lot of questions. Over 100 questions are recorded in the Gospels. But he asked a lot more questions than he was asked. Asked a lot more questions than he actually answered directly. And many of the questions he was asked, he responded with a question. Well, today we're going to look at two events in the Gospel of Mark, in the 10th chapter of Mark. And in both of these events, Jesus asks the same question. Now, the first one concerns James and John, two of the apostles. And they approach Jesus with a request. Now, in chapter 20 of Matthew, Matthew has their mother coming with the same request. And their request was simply, when you are in your glory, will you let us sit to your right and your left? In a sense, they were asking for a job promotion, that they could be the two honored to sit on either side of Jesus. And I don't know what your experience has been like if you've ever worked with someone who was constantly asking for a promotion or for a raise. Admittedly, it gets a little irritating sometimes if you've got a coworker like that. And of course, the other apostles were irritated with James and John. Uh, but when they approached him, Jesus asked them very simply, "What do you want me to do for you?" And that was their response. "Let us sit on either side of you in your glory." And his response to them was then, in essence, "You don't know what you're asking." Well, immediately after that event, then Mark moves Jesus and the disciples to Jericho. They're actually on their way to Jerusalem. And while they're passing through Jericho, and in those days, Jericho was actually two cities, Old Jericho and New Jericho. Old Jericho had kind of crumbled. New Jericho was there because King Herod had built his summer palace there, and then he built a whole city around it. It's about 5 miles west of the Jordan River, and it was about 18 miles northeast of Jerusalem. And by the side of the road, there was this guy who is always called Blind Bartimaeus. That was his nickname. They came to Jericho as Jesus and his disciples, together with a large crowd, were leaving the city. A blind man, Bartimaeus, that is, son of Timaeus, was sitting by the roadside begging. Now, it was very common for blind people or lame people to sit on the roadside, especially in the entrance and exits of cities, and then begging for food or money from the travelers. This is the last miracle that Mark records in his gospel. It's also the only time that Mark mentions someone by name, Bartimaeus, son of Timaeus. And scholars think that one of the reasons is because Bartimaeus may have then become a very active part of the church. And so people would have known him. When he, Bartimaeus, heard that it was Jesus of Nazareth, he began to shout, "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me." Many rebuked him and told him to be quiet. But he shouted all the more, "Son of David, have mercy on me." And Jesus stopped and said, "Call him." So they called to the blind man, "Cheer up, on your feet, he's calling you." And throwing his cloak aside, he jumped to his feet and he came to Jesus. And then Jesus asked his question, "What do you want me to do for you?" The blind man said, "Rabbi, I want to see." "Go," said Jesus, "your faith has healed you." Immediately he received his sight and followed Jesus along the road. And we can assume that he continued to follow Jesus right into Jerusalem, which means when we read about the triumphal entry, Bartimaeus is part of the crowd or part of Jesus' followers following him into the city. Now, at our Thursday Bible study, we've been looking at the four Gospels and different aspects of Jesus' life as recorded in the four Gospels, looking at where they're similar, where they're different. And so this week, we're going to be looking at the triumphal entry, which is one of those unique events that is recorded in all four Gospels. So as you read about the triumphal entry, just think in your mind, even though he's not mentioned, Bartimaeus very well could be there. What do you want me to do for you? It's an interesting question. And here in Mark, two requests placed back to back. If Jesus granted the request, they both implied responsibility. Responsibility on those who had made the request. For James and John, he responded in essence, "You don't know what you're asking." For Bartimaeus, Jesus granted the request and then said, "Go, your faith has healed you." Every answer to prayer, and I'm immediately taking these contexts and putting it within the context of prayer, because that's how you and I ask things of Jesus. Every answer to prayer brings with it a responsibility to the recipient. James and John were going to go through difficult times as well as wonderful times. Bartimaeus would no longer be begging for a living. He would need to take care of himself because he was no longer blind. Have you ever thought about the fact that when you make a request of Jesus, his answer will come with responsibility for you? What do you want me to do for you this week? Think about your answer. Imagine Jesus has asked that question of you. What is your answer? Will you be like James and John and ask for something huge, the consequences of which you cannot begin to understand? Will you be like Bartimaeus and ask for something that, though a miraculous healing, is still pretty practical? He wanted to see. What do you want me to do for you? Think about that this week as you spend your time alone with the Lord. And imagine him asking you that question, what do you want me to do for you? But then, think through what might be the responsibility that comes with that answer. Who are the beloved? Go and be the beloved.